Hey, contrólate. You ain't got no heart. Do something!
The movie opens with James Burns, a young man whose first day in prison quickly turns chaotic when a warden paralyzes him after he causes trouble on the bus transporting him. James was imprisoned for illegal firearm sales, drug possession, and other offenses. His mother, Tracy, had previously tried to enroll him in high school, but he was rejected due to his troubled past. Despite trying to turn his life around, James was frustrated that no school would accept him. While under house arrest, James notices the police monitor on his ankle before heading to a nearby market for milk. There, he meets Crystal and Drew, who are in the middle of robbing the store. After unintentionally getting involved, James befriends them. Soon after, Lieutenant Fulton, the prison warden, warns James to avoid causing trouble. Despite his short time in prison, James frequently gets into fights, usually defending other inmates from bullies. The scene then flashes back to James' criminal life, where Crystal introduces him to Rock, a man who hires them as drug couriers. Tracy, trying her best as a single mother, discovers alcohol in James' room one night and confronts him, reminding him of his upcoming legal appeal. However, James, angry and frustrated, cuts off his ankle monitor and defies her. Back in the present, James narrowly escapes an attack by Guillermo and his gang in the prison bathroom, but his friend Chris is seriously injured in the fight. Lieutenant Fulton blames James and places him in solitary confinement. Another flashback reveals James working with Rock as a getaway driver. Suspicious during one job, James takes control and helps his stranded partners. Impressed, Rock rewards James with money and offers him a permanent role in his operations. In prison, James observes a solitary inmate named Conrad, rumored to be a violent cop killer. Despite James' attempts to befriend him, Conrad remains distant. Flashbacks show James and Crystal in a convenience store where the cashier, Sarah, nervously suggests James take cigarettes and liquor without paying. As the film returns to the present, James' mother visits him in prison, encouraging him to behave well to get out sooner. Reflecting on her words, James decides to turn his life around, channeling his thoughts into poetry. Haunted by nightmares about Chris' injury, he uses writing as a way to cope with his life in prison. James later wrote a poem and shared it with Conrad, whose demeanor softened after reading it. Conrad encouraged James to keep writing to help ease the burden of prison life. From that point, James used poetry as a way to stay grounded and regain control over himself. Not long after, Chris recovered from his injury, and James promised to always protect him in prison. The scene shifts to the past, where Rock assigns James and Drew to collect a debt from a strip club owner. When the man refuses to pay, James pulls a gun on him, but they are ambushed by the man's bodyguards. After being thrown out, James, in a fit of anger, smashes the man's car window and finds a bag full of weapons. He takes the bag without hesitation. James, now friends with Sarah, has a heartfelt conversation with her, feeling happiness he hadn't known before. He decides to leave his criminal life behind and start anew with her. However, when he returns to Rock's headquarters, Rock berates him for stealing the guns and pressures him into one last job, selling the stolen weapons for a large sum of money. Desperate for cash to start his new life with Sarah, James agrees. Back in the present, James tries to get Chris transferred to a safer cell, but Lieutenant Fulton refuses. The next day, Guillermo provokes James, but James manages to control his temper. Meanwhile, Chris's sentence is increased to 6 years due to his involvement in the previous fight between James and Guillermo. James feels guilty for Chris's fate. Another flashback shows James and Sarah falling in love. James is determined to leave his life of crime behind, but Rock guilt trips him into staying for one last deal involving the stolen weapons. That night, as James and Drew wait for the buyer, a gunfight breaks out, and the police arrive. James and Drew manage to escape, but the police trace Rock's car, leading to the arrest of Rock and Crystal. James rushes to Sarah's house and urges her to leave town with him, but she refuses, insisting he face the consequences of his actions. Heartbroken and rejected, James is eventually caught by the police and sent to jail. In the meantime, Lieutenant Fulton is sued for failing to protect Chris, who ultimately committed suicide. James, devastated by Chris's death, becomes emotionally unstable and starts a fight in the yard. Conrad intervenes, warning James to stay focused because of his upcoming trial. During the trial, James expresses his remorse for Chris's death and his regret over his past decisions. While expecting a harsher sentence, he vows to change his life and never return to crime. Impressed by James's sincere confession, the judge reduces his sentence. James completes his sentence with good behavior and is eventually released. Before leaving, Conrad warns him that if he ever returns to prison, he'll kill him. Once outside, James is reunited with his mother and sister, happy to have him back. He finds a job as a janitor and, when offered illegal work by an old acquaintance, he turns it down. James later goes to visit Sarah, only to learn that she has moved. The film ends with James finally reuniting with Sarah, who is now engaged to someone else. Though happy to see him again and pleased with his transformation, Sarah has moved on with her life. The movie closes with the real-life James Burns, now a writer, producer, and activist, advocating for the protection of children and young people from violence.